Yes, it's my fuzzy jacket.
Yeah, we just have a couple of quick slides to go over before we're going to dive into a demo. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Office Hours today. Just want to remind everyone of our different formats. So we have to engage, we have this Office Hours, we have one in APAC monthly, and then we have development Office Hours focused on Python, Java, and helping with the development of those areas as well. With that, I'm going to dive into a quick announcement from our end. On the engagement side, we have been looking at ways to be able to hear your feedback and engage with you. And so with that, we'll be using GitHub discussions to be able to answer a lot of your feedback. We'll still have Discord, but that'll be primarily focused on customer to customer engagements. And so as we make that shift, I just want to remind everyone of our code of conduct and making sure to engage with that as well. And so I'll put a link to GitHub discussions as well and make an announcement out shortly, but just wanted to let everyone know around that. And then there are just two other forms that I'm going to link to that we'd love to get some feedback on. The first one is around kernel content and being able to get some feedback from you. And so I'll put that link to the form in chat. We'd love if you could take a minute or two to fill this out. That would really help us as well. And then the one other one that I wanted to highlight in GitHub is there's a Python poll that Edward posted out as well. And so I'll link to that. We'd love your feedback. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gil to go through dependency injections and demo there. So I'll go and stop sharing.
Hey, thanks, Sophia. Okay, so I'll share my screen. So you
I'm
should see my
excited.
screen by
Yeah,
now.
it's coming up, and I'm excited about what Gil's about to share. So I believe in previous office hours there's been a lot of questions about how to correctly do dependency injection with Semantic Kernel. So I know Sophia and Gil they did a blog post, which we can link into the chat that kind of walks through this. But yeah, Gil, take it away. Share us how to do dependency injection with Semantic Kernel.
Sure. So essentially, dependency injection with the semantic kernel is done the way dependency injection is done with anything else with .NET Core. So you create an application builder. In this case, is just a regular application builder. But if you use ESP.NET, then you would have you just create a regular application for the web, and the steps will be the same. So, the first thing we do is we get a configuration for our application. That's what we see here. Then we register an implementation of iChat completion. In this case, we will register that as an Azure OpenAI chat completion service. And notice that it makes use of the options that we previously registered. And an important thing to note here is that we could, if we wanted to, provide our own HTTP client to the Azure OpenAI chat completion service if we needed to. Then once we've got that service registered, we move on to register our plugins that we're going to use in our application. And this is what you can see here. You can register whichever plugins are required for your application, whether they be local plugins or OpenAI or OpenAPI plugins. If you needed to do that, you would you follow the steps that are here, which essentially is create a temporary kernel, register these plugins, and have them in your dependency injection container. Then the final step essentially is to register a kernel with the appropriate plugins that you're actually use for this kernel. When I say for this kernel, it's because you can have different kernels. One, let's say, for executing certain steps, another one for executing other steps, or you can just have the same kernel for everything. It's up to you to decide how you register your kernels. And once everything is registered, you just have to make use of it the regular way. So in this case, the code that's actually being executed is in worker. So I'll go to that class right now. And then just as you would expect normally, you can have access to everything that's been registered in dependency injection, as you would normally with any other app. So essentially, we register the kernel, and then this is what we get here in the constructor of the class where we're actually going to do the work. And then once we've got the kernel, we can proceed as usual. And this is what we see in the execution code of the code here. And that's essentially as simple as that. So basically, you just register the components you use, whether they be the kernel or specific plugins, and then you can make use of them. And notice that in the registration of the services that are registered, I specified an I-check completion service, which will be used by the kernels that are going to be created. And then I register the kernel. And then later on, when I make use of them, I get that kernel from the dependency injection container, and I can retrieve the I-check completion service from the kernel itself. And then after that, I proceed as usual. And that's pretty much all there is to it. I wonder, does anybody have any questions regarding this?
One of the most common questions that I get from customers is, I think in your example, you add the kernel as a transient. Is that right?
Correct.
One of the main reasons why we do that is the plugin collection is mutable, so it can change. And so the kind of keep things safe, you could always create a kernel every time you request it as part of dependency injection. In terms of performance, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's correct. So essentially, just to make sure that you don't interfere with other usage of the kernel, you can create one for any and all of the invocations by making it transient. And the cost associated with creating a kernel is very low, so there's no problem in doing so. I think that's what you're about to say, Matthew.
Yep. And I think to me, the magical line that I didn't know about until Gil started working on this was line 85. The kernel constructor just takes in a service provider and a plugin collection. So it's a great way of having that service provider defined elsewhere and passing it into the kernel. Well, I think we have a hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. So I see all the plugins are set up during the build process only. Can I add them later on when my application is already running? Can I add and remove the plugins?
So what you can do for that, you can create a new kernel later on. In this example, I created them originally, so because they're a singleton, so this way they don't have to be reinstantiated every time, and it's faster this way. So just the kernel is transient. But if later on you need to add plugins dynamically, you can totally do that for a specific kernel, and this way you can do things that you would not be able to do when you don't know all of the kernels you're going to have ahead of time. But I mean, all the plugins you're going to have.
And if you go to, I guess if you go to the worker file where you inject the kernel, I'm assuming we could, where do you inject the kernel? Right there, yeah. So you should be able to do like kernel.plugins.add, and at that point, add additional plugins.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Which goes back to why you might want to make the kernel transient, so that if you do add additional plugins, say on line 21, it doesn't impact other parts of your application. Cool. Well, thank you, Gil.
Sure.
Sophia, what's next on the agenda?
Just open Q&A. I'm seeing a good number of questions. And so the first one, Pawan, if you want to go and come off me, we'd love to dive into it.
Yeah, that question actually not related to what was presented. So if you want to give priority to others, that would be fine.
Oh, no worries. We're to open Q&A, so we'll go and dive
Okay,
into your
okay,
question.
perfect. Yeah, so I'm actually trying to build a, you can say, Copilot, which will be embedded inside Excel. And I'm working on building with SK, obviously. And user is going to interact with that Copilot, and that Copilot is connected to like enterprise applications like ERP, and it's gonna, based on the requirement from user or intent, it is going to pull data from, let's say, ERP, and it's gonna like put it in the worksheet, right? And then user could be asking some questions around that data. So I'm building on this, but then I got this thought that we have Office 365 copilots, right? And it's there for Excel and it's in preview. Would it be better to kind of extend that copilot, because it will already provide me a lot of features, right? Playing with Excel, formatting, formula, and all that. So I was just curious. I did some research, but not able to conclude if I have that path available today, extending the Excel copilot to do something like this. So if anybody knows here and can provide a point of view, it will be helpful, or else I will post it also in other forums. Let me know if I was clear. Yeah.
Yeah, very clear. I don't believe there's a like super, I would say, approved way of kind of extending or using copilots in your own applications, or bringing your own applications into the copilots today. There is work within Microsoft to make that possible. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to share, since those are other teams, and I believe those will be Microsoft Build announcements. But that is a need that folks are aware of on the Microsoft side, and there is plans to kind of address that. What I will share is internally within the Microsoft Semantic Kernel team, is what we've done is basically created like a Selenium browser, or you might use another kind of UI testing framework to basically spin up a Microsoft Word or spin up a Microsoft Excel, and then you could talk to those copilots through those testing frameworks, and kind of simulate a interaction between your agent and those agents inside of your applications. It's not ideal. It's kind of it's frankly a hack. But if you're trying to do some POC work, that might get you unblocked in the short term until there is more fully fleshed out extensibility.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. That helps.
Alrighty. So I think we have a hand raised. Tom, if you want to go ahead and come off mute.
Hi, yeah. How would you go about testing that the OpenAI or any model really isn't drifting? That's a concern that I've heard. And in general, what's your approach when it comes to testing the models? Obviously, it can be what's the word I'm thinking of? Like the response you're going to get is going to be different each time, depending on what the temperature you set it to. So have you got an approach in terms of unit, or probably more so integration testing, to check that the model still responds in the way that you would like each time? Hopefully that made sense.
When you say drifting, I'm assuming like every few months, OpenAI releases a new version of GTP 3.5 Turbo or 4. Is it drifting between those models, or are you concerned more even locally that as a user is using it, it starts to drift?
Yeah, I would say it's between the models, so the wider span of time. How can we validate and check that the model, which is obviously an essential part of the solution now, is still being validated that it performs in the same way you expect it to?
Makes sense. So what other parts of Microsoft recommend? So I'm thinking Azure AI Studio, and more specifically the prompt flow team, is to run what they call evaluations. And so what you'd likely do is you'd create a series of benchmark data queries. You'd run that through your current version of 3.5 Turbo, and it would generate a bunch of different responses, right? At that point, you could either have humans look at it, or the nice thing about evaluations is you can then have the model self-critique itself. So you could use something like GTP4 to say like, hey, did it actually answer that question? Obviously, humans is going to be a little bit more, I guess, like reliable. But from your case, what's helpful is you at least have a benchmark. You can ask GTP4 or a more advanced model, hey, rank from 0 to 10 how accurate or how effective this answer was, or how well did it call the right functions to address the user's needs. And so even if the model for a particular question is kind of off on its scoring, in aggregate, if you have enough benchmarks, you'll get a pretty kind of reliable number. And the trick is when you then move to the newer, latest model, what's nice is you'll have, let's say, 100 benchmark data that has a pretty stable, reliable evaluation score provided by GTP4. And when you move, you'll probably see some change, and the hope is that it moves up, right? Because the model is more capable and smarter. And if it moves down, that's when you'd want to investigate and say, hey, where did GTP4 start ranking things lower? So I can then get humans involved and start identifying, hey, what went wrong? What do we need to improve to address this drift?
So,
Okay. Go on, Logan.
Matt, just on that for a second, is there any plans for Semantic Kernel to support evaluations and aid us in doing that type of stuff?
Doing that type of stuff. So this is where we'll probably be leaning on kind of the broader Microsoft ecosystem. So I mentioned Azure AI Studio. So they have an entire like evaluations framework that you can use. One of the nice things that they also provide is you can run evaluations, not just like batches locally as tests, but you can also run them live in your production code. So whenever a user asks a question and the AI responds, you could have an evaluation that gives it a score, and you can start tracking that over time. So that's also helpful for detecting drift. So we'll lean on that. The challenge with Azure AI Studio, it is fairly Python. In fact, I think it only supports Python today. They have plans to change that, but that's kind of a limiting factor. We are also working with the team that owns Aspire, .NET Aspire.
Yeah.
They have plans on kind of adding some of this observability to their systems. Again, nothing kind of out of the box today, but I would expect if you do see functionality that helps with evaluations, helps with this telemetry, you probably won't see it in Semantic Kernel itself since we're focused on just like helping you orchestrate things, but you should see it in some of the other tooling that Microsoft provides when it comes to helping you build AI applications.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks for that.
I do see another hand raised if you want to come off of mute.
Sure, thank you. So I'm looking for some guidance here. I really like the auto invoke functionality that's out there in Semantic Kernel. A really nice one. I'm just looking like, if auto function has to call 3 or 4 functions, one after the another, in the order is not specified, right? And how do I control like in output of one call is not modified and fed as an input to another function call, and then it goes on like that. So I'm looking for a guidance. I haven't tried it yet. So is there anything out there that shows how to chain inputs and outputs when we are using auto invoke.
So with auto invoke, you're basically giving full control to the AI to quote unquote chain your functions. And so if you're using the latest model, so anything after November, you have also access to parallel function calling. And so what can happen, the different states that can happen, is the AI decides, oh, this user wants to, let's say, write a report on the differences between LangChain and Semantic Kernel. You've given it plugins for searching on Microsoft Bing and maybe another plugin to like write a report in Microsoft Word. What I would expect it to do is in the first step, create a parallel function call to both to Bing twice, one searching Microsoft Word, one searching Google for or Bing for LangChain, another one for Semantic Kernel. It would grab that information. And then when it wants to make the second call, you as the developer aren't doing anything to wire that information to go to that second tool call, right? The AI is the one that goes, oh, when I searched for LangChain, I got all this information. When I searched for Semantic Kernel, I got all this information. I want to pass that information to the next function so that it can write my Word document, right? So I call that out because you as a developer, the beauty of using AI is you aren't the one actually wiring all these things together. The AI is the one that's responsible. If you do want more control, if you want more determinism, if you want to say, hey, I do want to call these functions and these steps every single time, that to me is a sign that you wouldn't want to use automatic function calling. That's when you would want to use just traditional programming patterns, right? And if you want the AI to call that, then you might want to wrap that in as a plugin itself, as a tool call itself, so that you can give it to the AI. Did that help?
Yes, that did. And I was, I had a part 2 of that question. Like when first function call outputs something, and it is being fed into second function, would it be the raw data as is, or does AI manipulate it and changes that? So I don't want that to happen. Do I have to take care about that?
So like everything, it depends. So I guess my expectation is it does depend on how you provide a description for the input or that second function. You might say something like, hey, give me the raw JSON, don't make any changes, and the AI is going to be much more likely to pass that information along without any changes. There is risk, though, when you're using the LM to pass this information that it might hallucinate or make some changes that you don't want, right? So the next question is, how do you, again, add some more determinism to ensure that this doesn't happen? So one technique that I sometimes use, especially if I'm having to pass like large chunks of data that I don't want to appear in the chat history, that I don't want to have the AI have to like write out itself, is to kind of give things IDs. So you might imagine one plugin creates a CSV of a bunch of test data and another plugin that validates that the test data is real. You're obviously not going to have a function return 1,000 rows of test data just for the AI to then like rewrite all that test data to go into the next function call. So instead, what you might have is the function return an ID that says, hey, here's the ID or the file name or the identifier of the sample data that I've created. And your next function can have an input that says, hey, give me the identifier of the data that I'm supposed to use, right? And then the AI has a much easier time taking the output from one function and passing it to the other because it's just dealing with identifiers. And then you on the developer side can then use that identifier to wire that information back and forth.
Thank you.
Hopefully that helped.
Yes.
Great. Anthony, I see your hand as well. Do you want to come off of mute?
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Sophia, thanks for those blog posts. The recent one around the learning resources was great. And I kind of dived into the APL 2005 Develop AI Agents using Azure OpenAI in the Semantic Kernel SDK. If I can share my screen, are you guys okay with that? And I wanted to share with you it's something I bumped into, and it's like one of those things. It's like right off the bat, it was like it stumbled into a deployment issue. And I want to share with you guys the error message I'm getting and see what I can potentially do. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing this to our attention, and hopefully it's something we can fix if there's something wrong.
Yeah, and it's tough because, right, there's a lot of different components involved in this when it comes to your Azure portal and making sure to get all the resources set up right and the deployments right and all that stuff. And the training doesn't go through all that, so you got to kind of do that stuff, right? Yep. So just wanted to use this as maybe a learning exercise to see if it's something there or if it's so at any rate, it's a pretty simple thing, right, to start. I'm in the how to build your kernel page in the learn there. And it seems simple enough in terms of, I'm just doing this in a program.cs file. This is C#, right? And putting the code in pretty much exactly the way that it's asking for. I do have a question around ordering a little bit when it comes to the parameters that we're putting in here. Does it have to, does this order matter? Is it exactly in the order that it needs to be? Or is there like a way to do key value pairs instead of this? So then that doesn't matter the order. But the error that I'm getting is the API deployment for this resource does not exist. So I do have my Azure resource here. SK1 is my Azure OpenAI resource. And it does look like now when you go to, and I've got my keys and my endpoints, right? And that's where I'm getting that information from to put into here. And then the model deployments looks like you're managing deployments. I just created a separate tab so I can go back and forth between the two. But I did, create a new deployment for this, and I don't know if one got deprecated because this isn't an option for me anymore. This, if I wanted to create a new one, the SK1 GPT-3.5 Turbo 16K. So I created a new one called SK1 GPT-3.5 Turbo Instruct. And it looks like it's succeeded and it's deployed.
One observation there, Anthony. The instruct, the model instruct is actually a text completion and not a chat completion model. So for instruct, you would have to use add Azure text completion for probably to that work out. Okay.
You're for this build services here?
Yeah, it would be another extension method if you use .add Azure OpenAI text completion, if that does exist.
Okay, so if I'm using that deployment model, it's a text completion model?
Yeah.
So
so let me back up a bit. We'll definitely get to the instruct because I think that's confusing, and I want to explain that for everyone on the call. So one thing, I'm freaking out internally inside because the learn doc that you just shared is incorrect. So we need to get that. We need to get that fixed. So I'm going to share with you the right code so that you have access to it, and we'll get this fixed. I'm going to share this in the chat. Also, Evan mentioned in the chat you'll definitely want to reset your keys after the call.
Yeah. I was thinking about that as soon as I will definitely do that.
So if you pull up Teams, I just pasted in some more correct code. I think it also answers your question of like, hey, can you parameterize this so that the order doesn't matter? The biggest thing that I'm noticing in the learn document that's incorrect is the first parameter should be deployment name, not the last one. And so they kind of got these things swapped. So if you, definitely just check out.
Is it deployment? And that was the other thing, like, is it deployment name? Is it deployment model? Because those are very different Like if you
They're
go
very
to,
different. Yes.
yeah. And so if I
So,
go into this one here, like I'm like, should I be using this? Like, this is just some feedback when I'm in the learn itself. So I don't know, is this deployment name or is wait, let's see here. So there's deployment name is GPT-3.5 Turbo Instruct, right? And that's the name.
Yeah, when using Azure connector, you should specify the deployment name. The deployment is a mapping to what is actually the model. So when you're using the connector, you should be using the deployment name. And if you, instead of using the parameters directly, you use the dictionary, the named parameters, that will be clear for you on the method.
Okay, so going back to the training documentation, right? I'm just kind of as someone that's just reading the training documentation, I'm taking that deployment model in quotes there very literally.
Yeah.
Right. So then I'm saying, okay, deployment model, I'm in here. So should I be using model name or the deployment model itself? So that just to make it more clear in the training for whoever is putting the training together there.
yes. So as I mentioned, like not only is it confusing, it's wrong. so we need to get that fixed.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you take a look at the chat for the office hours, I dropped in what the more correct code should look like. And you can just copy and paste that in real quick, and that's what I'll be asking the author of this content to update it to.
All right, so I just put that, I just copied and pasted here real
Yes.
quick. I don't know what collapse is, but
oh yeah, I think that's just yeah. So
build
so
it.
you should
So
yeah,
that
so instead of go ahead.
Oh no, please. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh yeah, that's fine. So you have builder.services.add Azure OpenAI chat completion, right? And it opens up. You can then you ask the question of like, hey, can I parameterize this so that the order doesn't matter? And so lines 28 to 32 kind of show how to do that. Right?
Okay.
And then hopefully this also makes it a little bit more clear that first variable should be deployment name, so the actual name of the deployment. And then you can optionally also provide the model name, which is the very last one, model ID. And then that would be the actual name of the model. So for your particular case, the deployment name would be SK1 GPT-3.5 Turbo Instruct, and the model ID would be just GPT 3.5 Turbo Instruct. On it.
Okay. You mind if I just go through it here real quick, just to put it in there, just to make sure?
Yeah. And you should be able to just update your lines 15 to 18 with those input parameters.
But isn't it not going to work because he doesn't have environment variables? He's got the actual values.
Oh yeah, like yeah, you'd want to change where it says environment variables to like
just how you have it now. I mean, you should learn how to have those elsewhere, so you don't have to show them when you share your screen. But to correct this, you have to get rid of environment variable and open and close parentheses from what he just pasted there, because you don't have environment variable set up. You just have the values straight up in there.
Yeah.
Sorry to just jump in.
Yeah. And that first observation that I did on the instruct is a text completion. So probably you want to use a deployment that is chat completion for that.
So Matthew, I see like, there is a mention of API key value for the endpoint. So it has to be endpoint instead.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, so if we could go through just real quick line by line.
Yeah.
I've heard multiple things about this line 14, and I just want to Azure. What's in the training on Microsoft Learn is add Azure OpenAI chat completion. However, I've heard that it needs to be add Azure OpenAI text chat completion.
No.
Text generation.
We'll get to instruct in a bit. chat is correct for 99% of your use cases. So line 14 is correct. So keep that as is.
Okay. This is in the wrong order right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to.
So instead of type in deployment name.
Yep.
Yep. Colon. And then the property that should be here is the name of your deployment, which in this case is SK. Actually, can you go back to the previous screen on the right? Your list of models.
Oh, yes.
Deployments on the left, click, there you go.
Okay, so what we'll want to use is the second one, SK1 GPT-3.5 Turbo 16K. So that value is what's going to be for deployment name.
Yeah. Can I show you one thing related to that? When I was just
sure.
tinkering around and creating a new deployment, I select a model.
Yep.
And then when I chose, because I thought maybe there was something wrong with this model when I was just trying to troubleshoot it. And when I tried to create a new one for GPT 3.5 Turbo S 16K, this is what I got. No quota available. Select a different version.
Yeah, so I forget where this is set up, but each subscription has a limited amount of, they call it quota, to create new models. And so it looks like you just hit your limit for this particular subscription. So you would want to delete this model if you wanted to create a new one.
But this one should still work. The one
yes.
Okay, I didn't know if that. Okay, cool, got it. So let me. So that is my deployment name here.
Yes, that's the deployment name. Yep.
And previously, I think it was called deployment model, and that's just a little. Well, they're two different things. So one is SK1, my deployment name one, and then the model name is GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K. Which one should I use? This one or this one?
Deployment name, the very first column. Yep.
Okay, so that's in the training. It says deployment model. Just FYI.
Yeah, so that is different. So we'll get to that in a bit. The first line is your resource name. That's the confusing bit. That should change to your deployment name.
Oh, so it's okay. So it shouldn't be resource name at all.
Yeah, it should be your deployment name. Yes.
Okay, got it.
That's what's wrong with the docs. So we'll get that updated. But if you change that to deployment name and make that the first variable.
And the gentleman that was talking about environment variable, do I not put anything in there for that? And then do I just do quotes at this point?
That's right. Just quotes.
Because you're hard code.
Yeah, you're just hard coding it right now. On line 16, so what you just pasted should be after line 15.
Oh, geez. I don't know why
and then you'll delete line 16. And then the rest of it should be correct and you'll be able to use it. So while you're moving that string to the right spot, for everyone else on the call, one of the learning things I want to make sure everyone kind of rocks is most models that you're going to be working with for your AI will be chat completion models. Chat completion models, you can imagine like you have your system message and user messages and assistant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why you'd want to use that is having those different roles is more effective for the model to generate the type of content that you typically need for your customers. There are a very small sliver of scenarios, though, where that type of structure doesn't make sense. So, for example, if you're building an application where you need a autocomplete experience, right? That's not based in chat. It's just, hey, the user's typing in, hello, my name is Matthew, I am a, and you need to autocomplete the rest of it. For that type of scenario, what you actually need is a text generation service. So OpenAI basically deprecated all of their text generation services, but to support this very small subset of scenarios, they added one new model, which is the instruct model. So if you ever need a text generation service, if you ever need a text generation model from OpenAI, you'll want to use the GP 3.5 Turbo-instruct model. For all other cases, do not use the instruct model, right? So that's kind of the FYI for everyone. Okay, cool.
And I'm just putting this in to see if it works, and I'll obviously change my keys right after this.
So while you're working on that, this should work. We can go to the next question if there's one, Sophia.
There's a couple from earlier in today's meeting that I want to circle back on. The first one is from Juddy. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. If you want to come off of mute, we'd love to dive into your question that you had. I'm just looking through and they may no longer be on the call. So there's one other question from Logan. Logan, do you want to come off of mute?
So my question's already been covered by Tom and Matt today. So
perfect.
It's covered. Thanks for that.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any other ones in chat. Does anyone else have a question that they want to come off of mute with while we're going through the code debugging?
Oh, I guess there was a question on like parallelize function calling and if that can be turned on or off. I think I remember seeing that somewhere.
Yeah, I put that in, but I can't even find it myself now.
That was the one from Juddy. I don't think he's on anymore.
Oh, there's another one from Tom. So real quick on that, I was just looking at the OpenAI docs. There does not appear to be the ability to turn off parallel function calling. From my own personal experience, just adding a system prompt that says something to the effect of, you are only allowed to call one tool at a time, that typically disables that functionality and will only just call one at a time. I've also found this useful. Sometimes the model is like super aggressive at parallel function calling. So I mentioned the research scenario. Hey, I want to research different kind of programming languages so that you can write a report on it. It might call like 5 different functions in parallel, which can be a lot, right? As part of the system prompt, what I typically do is like at most call 2 or 3, right? So you can kind of customize behavior through those system prompts.
Okay, my question was slightly different, more in the semantic kernel world, which is I'm happy for OpenAI to request multiple or parallel. Do the processing of those happen in parallel in semantic kernel, or are they, in order, sequential?
The sequential. So today, if I remember correctly, the implementation, it is serial. So we're actually not parallelizing the calls. I suspect that will be an opt-in experience, which you're asking for.
Yeah.
At some point. That is not available today.
Okay, that's fine.
It is run sequentially.
I was like, oh, that'll be cool. How do I turn that on? The answer is wait, be patient.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
Question on the service ID.
You don't need service ID and you don't need model ID. All you need is deployment name, endpoint, and API key. Get rid of service ID and model ID, and it'll work. Model ID is used for some other scenario. I don't recall what that other scenario is, but if you're using Azure OpenAI, you just need those first 3.
Yep, you can delete those.
Okay.
So while you're deleting those, I'll share with the rest of the audience what those are used for. So yeah, you can delete that. So there are some. Yeah, get rid of the comma. So there are some scenarios where you want to more uniquely identify your chat completion model in this case. You might be adding multiple them to the kernel. And so one of the easiest ways to differentiate them is you can give them different service IDs so that later in your application, so this is only used by your application, you can differentiate between the two different services, right? So you can say, hey, for one of them, maybe the service ID is East US, so you can use that model, and maybe another one is West US, and you can use that one, right? The model ID parameter is, again, something that's optional, that is only used by your own application. That is, again, used to kind of differentiate which model you're using elsewhere in your application. In one part of your application, you might want to use 3.5 Turbo, and another one you might want to use GTP4. The reason why this is valuable is, as you're seeing on the screen right now on line 15, the deployment name is not something that is always tied to the model, right? You might have a deployment for East US and another one for West US or wherever it might be, right? And so being able to have that optional model ID parameter is useful if you have different models, different deployments that all target the same model. Okay. And it looks like your application now works.
It worked. Yeah. Okay.
Congrats. Okay, so I'm going to steal the screen away from you. So
Reset
that you
that key.
can now go reset those keys. Yes.
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Doing that right now. Thanks.
Okay. Cool. All righty.
Thank you for that. That was, yeah, I was.
And we will definitely follow up with the author of that learn content so that we can get that updated. Thank you for sharing the challenges that you had. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you all.
Are there any other questions, Sophia?
No other ones I'm seeing in chat, but as always, feel free to come off mute, anyone.
In that
I
case,
have a quick
oh,
question,
yeah, go ahead.
if that's all right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
asked this last time and just checking it. Does anyone know of an example of just a vanilla GPT like clone using Semantic Kernel using the new Blazor web app template from .NET? So not the old Blazor, the new one that just came out at the beginning of this year. Maybe no one knows now, but if anyone does or ever shares it, I would. Still working on figuring out how to do it myself, but thought I'd check.
So I don't believe there's been any update since last time. What I would say is we are working now with the teams that own a lot of those samples, and they're basically creating like two versions of everything, or they're just replacing what they have today with Semantic Kernel. So I would expect over time to see those things updated and actually use Semantic Kernel. The ask I have, I'm sure you shared it last time, but if you don't mind dropping a link to the Blazor application in the chat, I can use that and basically ask the team, hey, can you prioritize this one over some of the others that you're updating?
Amazing. Yeah, I'll get that right now.
Thank you.
Of course.
And while we have some extra time, I just want to +1 some of the links that Sophia shared at the beginning. So just as a reminder, Discord is still going to exist. We're going to kind of use that as a place that the community can share ideas and talk to each other and collaborate. For particular issues, though, that you want like immediate attention by the Semantic Kernel team, we are going to be starting to use GitHub discussions. The reason for that is it makes it a little bit easier to like have a conversation that we can track over time. If you search questions about Semantic Kernel on Google, they'll pop up so people can use it. In Discord, everything's kind of like this opaque box that you can't access. And the last one is it allows us to track that we actually answered your question. So Sophia's been doing a great job of going through our existing GitHub discussions, finding folks on our team to answer them, and then once we have an answer, marking it answered. It's hard for us in Discord today for us to know, hey, was a question actually answered? Did you leave satisfied? We can do all of those mechanisms within Discord discussions. So highly recommend going there if you have any questions on Semantic Kernel outside of the office hours. And then the other link that she shared, actually there's two. We have two surveys for folks. The first one she mentioned was and she's linked it again at the bottom, is all around kernel content. So we're doing some work to make our multimodal APIs non-experimental. So if you have any use of images, audio, video, please, 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 please fill out that survey. It's super short. It's super simple. I'm just going to pull it up here just to like demystify it. We just want some contact information so we can reach out to you. And then we were really, really interested in number 5, like what scenarios are you actually interested in? This will allow us to build samples on these different modalities so that we can make sure that when we ship these things, it actually addresses the scenarios that you need. So this is also a really great way to influence what samples we build. So let us know. Let us know in that text box. Okay. And then lastly, if there are folks on the Python world providing some information on which version of Python you use will be very, very helpful. Okay. Sophia, is there anything else you want to leave folks with?
Nothing else. I'm seeing a couple of questions come through. The first one, are you aware if Semantic Kernel works with local AI?
Yeah. So a lot of the local model deployments, so you might be using LLM Studio or you might be using Ollama. Most of these now support the OpenAI API spec. So the same way that you talk to the OpenAI servers, you actually talk to your local deployments. If that's the case, which in most cases it is, you can actually use the existing OpenAI chat completion service connector. And the only difference that you would make is updating the endpoint. Roger, you actually helped kind of make sure this all works. Do you mind? I think we have a sample. I may or may not be mistaken, but if you don't mind linking that in the chat, that could help.
Sure. I'll put a link here. It's a PR. It's not merged yet, but it's an example using LM Studio. But currently, with our latest changes in the chat completion for the OpenAI regarding the items in the chat, I'm not sure if that will work with the first version of the OpenAI spec. But yeah, I can double check on this one. But yeah, normally that would be the ideal scenario in which you use an OpenAI spec connector, changing the endpoint and working towards the local AIs. But sooner we're gonna have launching the Hugging Face chat completion, which can be used as well for local endpoints for chat completion support too. So.
Thank you, Roger. No, I was just looking at the docs for local AI. It does use the OpenAI REST APIs. So this process that Roger's sharing will work.
And then while that's being shared out, there are 2 final questions. I'm seeing one is from Patrick. He's also happy to help with testing, but he's wondering if there is a TypeScript implementation of Semantic Kernel.
There is currently not. I know there's been some discussions in Microsoft-wide on do we invest in a TypeScript library. We don't have any commitments right now, though, for one.
And the last one I'm seeing is from Jay. There's actually an error that he is getting. Jay, do you want to come off of mute?
Yeah, just reading your question, Jay, there is supposed to be another package that you're supposed to import. I'm just going to link it in chat. I'll also double check the learning content to make sure that that is included as part of the steps. But there's a package for all of the different plugins that you would want to install into your application. And then Mohammed, you had an ask on session recordings. So earlier in the chat, someone asked something similar. We're meeting with some of the folks that own the compliant way of uploading videos to YouTube tomorrow. Once that's done, we'll be able to start posting some of these sessions there. And Sophia plans on uploading all the previous sessions that are currently not on YouTube. So we're just doing some compliance on our side to make sure that we upload things in the right way.
Thanks, Matthew.
All righty. Well, I think we're at time. Sophia, nothing else, yes?
Nothing else from me. I was looking through, I don't see any other questions. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
For sure. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.